She was on her knees in the dust, her hands trembling as she pulled scraps of food from the ground. The pieces were dirty, half spoiled, and covered with sand, but her stomach was empty, and the hunger was stronger than her pride. Around her, people watched with cruel smiles. Some laughed, others whispered insults, calling her names that cut deeper than knives. She had once been proud, standing tall among her kind, but now she was nothing more than a rejected slave, forced to eat like an animal to stay alive. Her lips shook as she chewed, her throat tight with shame. She could feel eyes on her, heavy and sharp, stabbing at her spirit. But she refused to bow her head. Even in misery, her eyes held a fire. She had rejected her master, refused to obey him when he demanded something she could not give. For that choice, her life had been torn apart. He stripped her of her status, left her with nothing, and commanded the world to treat her worse than dirt. Children pointed at her, throwing small stones as if she was a creature from the wild. Merchants kicked dust in her direction, making her cough as she tried to swallow the scraps. A guard walked past, sneering, but he did not stop them. To him, she was not worth protection. She was marked, less than a slave, a warning to others who might dream of defiance. And so she stayed in the filth, holding on to the last fragments of her pride while the world spat on her. Her stomach twisted painfully, each bite a reminder of her fall. She remembered the grand halls of her people, the lights, the music, the fine food she once tasted, now the same lips that had once sipped from golden cups pressed against dirt-stained crumbs. She should have been broken, but still, her heart whispered one truth: better to suffer than to surrender. That was why she had said no, why she had chosen disgrace over slavery of the spirit. Still, the hunger grew crueler. Her hands shook harder as she reached for another scrap. It slipped from her grasp, landing in the dirt again. A man in the crowd laughed loudly, kicking it farther from her reach. Others joined, clapping as if it was a game. She stared at the food, then at the laughing faces, and her chest burned with rage. But she could do nothing. She was weak, starved, and alone. Slowly, she crawled forward again, her knees scraping the rough stone beneath her. Her throat was dry, her breath shallow. She wondered if this was how her story would end. Forgotten in the dust, treated as less than a creature, her name erased. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting back tears. She would not let them see her cry. She had already given them enough to laugh at. The market grew louder, but then the sound changed. The laughter stopped, replaced by a low murmur. The crowd shifted slightly, people stepping back as someone new entered the circle. The girl froze, her hand still stretched toward the scrap of food. A shadow fell across her. She looked up slowly and saw a pair of boots, strange boots, not like the ones her people wore. They were heavy, built for travel, marked with dirt from long journeys. Her heart raced. She lifted her gaze higher, and her breath caught. It was not one of her own kind. It was a human. She had heard stories of them, strange creatures from another world, known for their stubbornness, their wild courage, their refusal to bow to anyone. Some said they were reckless, others said they were dangerous, but no one had ever called them cruel. The human crouched down in front of her. His eyes were steady, not mocking, not cold. In his hand was a piece of bread, clean, unbroken, untouched by dirt. He held it out to her without a word. For a moment, she could not move. Her pride screamed at her not to take it, not in front of the crowd that had laughed at her. But her body betrayed her, her hunger twisting her insides until she felt faint. The crowd began to laugh again, but this time at the human. They shouted at him, telling him to step back, to let her rot like the animal she was. Someone threw another stone, this time at him. It bounced off his shoulder, but he did not flinch. He kept his eyes on her, steady and calm, as if the crowd did not exist. His hand did not shake. She wanted to refuse, to spit at the bread, to show them all that she would rather die than be pitied. But when she looked into the human's eyes, something inside her shifted. There was no pity in his gaze, only respect, quiet respect, as if he saw not a broken slave, but a fighter who had chosen dignity over chains. Her hand trembled as she reached out. Slowly, she took the bread from his hand. It was soft, warm. She held it close, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. She took a bite, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she tasted real food. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back. The human spoke then, his voice low but strong, carrying enough weight for the crowd to hear. "You'll never eat from the ground again," he said. "Not while I'm alive." The crowd fell silent. The girl stared at him, her heart pounding. No one had ever spoken for her before. No one had stood between her and the cruelty of the world. She did not know his name. She did not know why he cared. But in that moment, something changed. Her life of shame had been interrupted by a stranger, a human. And for the first time in many nights, a fragile spark of hope lit inside her chest. The bread in her hand felt unreal, almost like a dream. She stared at it for a long moment, as if afraid that it would vanish the second she blinked. The crowd still muttered around her, voices full of mockery and disgust, but their words no longer pierced her the same way. For the first time, someone had stepped between her and her shame. The human was still crouched near her, his hands steady, his gaze firm, like he had not done something strange at all. To him, offering food to a broken soul was nothing unusual. To her, it was everything. She chewed slowly, afraid to finish too fast, afraid that the taste would leave her forever. Every bite warmed her stomach, chasing away the emptiness that had tormented her for days. She tried to speak, but her throat closed, the words refusing to come. No one had shown her kindness since she had rejected her master. Every glance had been cruel, every word a weapon. And now this stranger looked at her with quiet calm, not asking for anything, not mocking, not demanding her to kneel. The people watching grew restless. One merchant shouted at the human, "Leave her! She chose disgrace. Now let her eat dirt." Another laughed loudly, calling him a fool for wasting food on an animal. Stones clattered at their feet, but the human did not rise. He stayed beside her, his voice calm but filled with strength when he finally spoke. "She is not an animal," he said. The words carried through the marketplace, silencing some, angering others. Her heart thudded at those words. Not an animal. No one had spoken like that about her for a long time. She wanted to believe him, but the shame inside her was heavy, pressing down like chains. She shook her head, whispering that he should go, that helping her would only bring him trouble. Her voice was barely a breath, but he caught every word. His answer was simple, but unshakable. "Then let trouble come. I will not step away." The crowd grew louder, mocking him, calling him mad. "Humans are strange," one alien muttered, spitting on the ground. "They think they can change the law of our kind." A group of children laughed, chanting insults, trying to break the moment of quiet dignity. But nothing they said made him move. He reached into his pack and brought out more food, fruit this time, clean and bright in color, untouched by dirt. He placed it gently before her. Her body ached with hunger, but her pride screamed at her. To eat what he offered would mean accepting his protection. To accept meant admitting her weakness. She stared at the fruit, her fingers twitching, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The human did not push her, did not force her hand. He simply waited, patient, his eyes locked on hers. The silence between them was louder than the mocking voices around. Finally, her strength gave way. Slowly, with shaking hands, she picked up the fruit. She held it close to her lips, her eyes burning with tears that refused to fall. When she bit into it, sweetness filled her mouth, so rich that it almost hurt. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in so long, she felt alive. The human nodded once, as if satisfied. "No one deserves to be treated like dirt," he said firmly. His words were not just for her. They were for the crowd. A challenge thrown into their faces. Gasps rose, some in anger, some in shock. No one ever questioned the punishment of a rejected slave. No one dared. But this human had done so without hesitation. The alien girl felt the weight of every eye on her, but this time it was different. She was not alone in the dust. Someone stood with her, someone the crowd could not break with their laughter. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Why? Why would you help me?" Her voice cracked, the words heavy with confusion. The human looked at her with steady calm. "Because you deserve to eat with dignity, because you are not broken. You only need someone to remember it." His voice was not loud, but it struck deeper than any shout could. Her chest tightened. For so long she had believed she was forgotten, worthless, a warning for others never to rebel. Yet here was a stranger, a human who owed her nothing, speaking as if her life still had value. She lowered her head, unable to meet his eyes. "I am not clean," she whispered. "I am nothing." But he leaned closer, his words sharp like a blade. "You are not nothing. Do not let them decide your worth." The crowd hissed and booed. One of the guards nearby stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "Enough," the guard barked. "Leave the slave and go, human. This is not your fight." But the human did not rise, did not bow. He stood then, slow and deliberate, towering against the guard. His hand rested near his belt, but he did not draw a weapon. His presence alone was enough to silence the laughter for a moment. "She is not a slave," he declared. His voice carried across the square, echoing against the walls. "And she will not eat from the dirt again, not while I am alive." The girl's heart stopped at those words. She wanted to protest, to tell him he would be punished for this, that the master who had cast her down would never forgive such defiance. But another part of her, the part that had been crushed and buried under shame, rose trembling from the ashes. Someone was willing to stand for her. Someone was willing to fight. Her hands clenched around the bread and fruit, not from fear, but from a strange, fragile hope. The human's voice had cut through the chains of her despair like a blade through rope. The crowd did not matter anymore. Their laughter, their insults, their cruel stares, all faded into the background. For the first time in her life of rejection, she was not alone. A human, a stranger from another world, had chosen to see her not as dirt, not as a warning, but as a person. And in that moment, even before she knew his name, she felt a spark inside her heart, something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The market was buzzing with whispers. What the human had done spread quickly from one mouth to another. By helping the rejected slave, he had broken an unspoken rule, a rule enforced for generations. No one dared to protect someone marked as less than nothing. And yet, this stranger had stood before everyone and said she was not an animal, not dirt, but worthy of dignity. Her former master heard about it before the sun had fully crossed the sky. He was a man of cruel pride, one who used fear to control his slaves and power to command respect. When his guards told him the story, his face twisted with rage. To be rejected by her had already stung his pride once. But now, for a human to step in, to challenge his authority so openly, it was an insult he could not ignore. His voice was like venom when he gave the order. "Bring me the human." The girl felt her heart freeze when she saw the guards marching through the crowd. Their armor clinked as they moved, their faces set with grim duty. People stepped aside quickly, eager to see what would happen. The human stood still, his hand resting on the strap of his pack. His eyes did not flinch when the guards surrounded him. "You dare interfere with the master's will?" one of them barked. His spear was pointed toward the human's chest. "Hand over the slave. She belongs to him. She always will." The alien girl shook her head, her voice trembling. "No. Please. Don't fight them. You don't know what they'll do." She pulled at the human's sleeve, begging him to walk away, to leave her before it was too late. But the human only turned his head slightly, his calm voice cutting through her panic. "I don't walk away from injustice." The guards laughed bitterly. "Injustice? This is law. She defied her master. She is marked forever. No one may protect her." Their weapons gleamed in the sunlight as they tightened the circle around him. The crowd pressed closer, excited to watch blood spill. No one believed a lone human could stand against the master's men. But the human did not back down. His jaw tightened, his body still but ready. "Then your law is wrong," he said firmly. The words struck like thunder, bold and reckless. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. No alien had ever dared say such a thing, not even in whispers. For a foreigner to say it aloud, it was madness. The first guard lunged, thrusting his spear forward. The human moved in a blur, stepping aside and grabbing the shaft with one hand. With a sharp twist, he pulled the weapon free and shoved the guard back into his companions. The crowd roared with shock. They had expected him to die instantly. Instead, he fought like someone who had faced death many times and refused to bow. The girl's eyes widened as she watched. Each movement was sharp and precise, no wasted effort, no fear in his steps. He fought not for glory, not for pride, but for her. Every strike, every block was a shield between her and the men who wanted to drag her back into chains. The guards tried to overwhelm him, 3 against 1. Their blades flashed, their spears thrust, but the human ducked low, dodged, and struck back. He kicked one guard's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Another swung a sword, but the human caught his arm and drove his elbow hard into the man's face. Blood sprayed, and the guard fell back, clutching his broken nose. The crowd roared louder, some cheering, some shouting curses. The alien girl felt her chest burn with something she had not felt in years: pride. For once, someone stood for her, not with empty words, but with fists, with courage, with fire in his eyes. The last guard, still standing, hesitated, his grip shaky on his spear. He had seen enough to know this human was no ordinary traveler. But fear of the master pushed him forward. He charged, roaring, his weapon aimed to pierce straight through the stranger's chest. The human sidestepped at the last moment, grabbed the spear, and swung the guard off balance. With a single hard shove, he sent him sprawling into the dirt. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. 3 guards lay groaning on the ground, beaten but alive. The human dropped the spear, letting it clatter against the stones. He stood tall, breathing hard but steady, his eyes locked on the crowd. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with disbelief. Then a slow clap echoed through the marketplace. The crowd parted as the master himself stepped forward. His eyes burned with fury, his smile cold and sharp. His robes shimmered with wealth, his presence heavy with authority. He looked at the girl first, his voice like poison. "You dare let another fight for you? You shame me twice, creature." Then his gaze shifted to the human. "And you think beating a few guards makes you strong? No. It makes you foolish." The crowd held its breath. The girl trembled, knowing what was coming. The master would not let this pass. He raised his hand, pointing at the human like a judge sentencing death. "By sacred law, you have insulted me. You have spilled the blood of my men. There is only one path now: a duel." Gasps erupted. The people knew what it meant. A duel by sacred law was not just a fight. It was a battle to decide honor, to decide fate. Once declared, it could not be avoided. The girl's heart dropped. She whispered in fear, her voice barely audible, "No, you'll die. No human can beat him." Her eyes filled with tears, but the human did not look at her. His gaze stayed on the master, steady and unshaken. "I accept," he said, his voice like steel. The marketplace exploded with noise, cheers, shouts, and chaos. The master's smirk widened. He was taller, stronger, trained from youth in combat. To him, this would be easy, a chance to crush both his defiant slave and the fool who dared protect her. But the human's stance did not waver. He stood as if carved from stone, unafraid, ready. For him, this was not about pride or law. It was about the promise he had made. She would never eat from the dirt again, not while he lived. And he meant every word. The circle was drawn in the market square, wide enough for everyone to see. People pushed and shoved to get closer, eager to watch the duel. Some whispered that the human would be slaughtered within minutes. Others said it was a lesson. No one, not even a stranger, could stand against the master's pride. The alien girl stood at the edge of the circle, her hands shaking. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. She wanted to scream at the human to run, but she knew it was impossible. Once the duel was declared, there was no escape. The master entered the circle first. His armor gleamed under the sunlight, decorated with the symbols of his rank. He carried a long, curved blade, sharp enough to slice through stone. His confidence was clear in every step. He looked at the human as one might look at an insect, something to crush and forget. The human stepped into the circle without armor, without wealth, without fear. His only weapon was a short blade he borrowed from the ground after disarming a guard earlier. It looked almost pitiful compared to the master's shining sword. Yet his stance was steady, his eyes calm. He had fought battles before. That much was clear. The air grew heavy with silence as the master raised his blade. "When I am done," he said loudly, so all could hear, "she will crawl again in the dirt where she belongs. And you, human, will be nothing more than another fool who thought himself brave." The crowd cheered his words, eager to see blood. But the human did not answer. He simply lifted his blade, ready. The master moved first. His strike was fast and powerful, aimed to end the fight in a single blow. The human barely dodged, the blade cutting a strand of his hair as it passed. Gasps rose from the crowd. The alien girl's knees weakened, her breath stuck in her throat. She thought it was over, but the human straightened, unharmed, his eyes sharper than before. The duel continued. The master's attacks were like thunder, loud, heavy, destructive. The human moved like water, flowing, stepping aside, letting the strength of each strike waste itself on empty air. Still, he could not dodge everything. A slash cut across his arm, blood dripping to the ground. The crowd roared at the sight, cheering the master. The girl cried out softly, covering her mouth, but the human did not fall. He gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on the blade. Every time the master struck, the human learned. He studied the rhythm, the arrogance in the master's swings. His body ached, but his spirit refused to bend. He remembered the girl crawling in the dirt, her eyes burning with shame, and that memory gave him strength. He had promised she would never suffer again. That promise became his shield. The fight grew more brutal. The master landed another blow, this time across the human's side. The pain was sharp, but instead of retreating, the human stepped forward, too close for the long blade to be useful. His smaller knife slashed across the master's arm, leaving a red line. The crowd gasped in shock. The master's face twisted with rage. For the first time, he was bleeding in front of his people. The duel turned into a storm of steel and grit. The master fought harder, wild with anger, his swings faster, heavier. The human ducked, blocked, rolled away, always moving, always searching for a chance. His body screamed in pain, but his spirit pushed him forward. Each time he staggered, he forced himself to rise again. The crowd began to shift, their cheers uncertain. Was it possible? Could this human actually stand against their master? The alien girl's eyes never left him. Every cut he took, she felt in her heart. Every drop of his blood made her want to run into the circle, to shield him, though she knew she could not. She whispered under her breath, begging the universe to let him survive, to let him win. The master's fury blinded him. His strikes became sloppy, too heavy, leaving openings. The human saw it. With a deep breath, he timed his move. When the master swung down with all his strength, the human sidestepped and struck with precision. His blade sank into the master's leg, forcing him to stumble. The crowd gasped as the proud warrior dropped to one knee. But it was not over. The master roared, swinging wildly even from the ground. The human barely avoided the deadly arc, his chest brushing the blade as it passed. He moved in closer, too close for the master's strength to matter, and with a sudden burst, he slammed the hilt of his knife against the master's head. The alien stumbled, his grip faltering, his sword falling from his hand. Silence fell. The master was on his knees, disarmed, blood running down his face. The human stood above him, breathing hard, covered in sweat and wounds, but still steady. He raised his blade, the tip pointed at the master's throat. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some shouted for the human to kill him. Others begged for mercy. The alien girl's eyes filled with tears. She could not believe what she was seeing. The man who had saved her from shame was now standing victorious against the one who had destroyed her life. The master glared up at him, spitting blood. "Do it then. End me. Or are you as weak as your kind?" The human's voice was rough but firm. This fight was never about killing. It was about dignity. He pressed the blade just close enough for the master to feel the edge, to know he had been defeated. Then he stepped back, letting the sword fall to his side. The crowd gasped louder than ever. The master had been beaten, humiliated in front of all, and the human had spared his life. It was worse than death. His power, his pride, his authority, they had been shattered. The alien girl covered her mouth, her chest heaving with relief and disbelief. No one had ever fought for her dignity before. No one had ever risked so much just to keep a promise, and yet this human had done it. The duel was decided. The human had won. And though his body bled, his spirit shone brighter than anyone's in that circle. The people would never forget this moment, and neither would she. The marketplace was still echoing with the sounds of shock and disbelief. The master, once feared and obeyed, was on his knees, defeated. Blood ran down his face, his weapon lay forgotten on the ground, and his pride was broken before all who watched. No one had ever imagined such a scene. A human, a stranger with nothing but courage, had stood against him and won. The alien girl's heart raced as she stared at the human, standing tall despite his wounds. His arm was bleeding, his side torn, and yet his eyes were steady, strong as iron. He had not fought for glory. He had not fought for riches. He had fought for her dignity. The thought burned inside her chest, filling her with a warmth she had not felt in years. The master's lips curled in fury. His pride would not allow silence. He spat blood on the ground and shouted, "This is not finished. You may have won the duel, human, but you are nothing. Without me, she is still a slave. She belongs to me." His voice was full of rage, but there was fear hidden beneath it. Fear that the crowd could now see his weakness. The human stepped closer, his blade in hand, though he did not raise it to strike. His voice cut through the air like thunder. "No, by your sacred law, you have lost. And by that same law, her fate is mine to decide." The crowd gasped, voices rising in shock. They knew the law. Whoever won the duel had the right to claim the loser's possessions, including slaves. The people leaned forward eagerly, waiting to hear what the human would demand. Most expected him to claim her as his own, to bind her to him in chains, as was tradition. Some even laughed, saying it was only fair. After all, no one would risk their life for a slave without reward. The alien girl trembled. Her chest tightened, and she lowered her eyes. She had feared this moment. Even if the human was kinder than her master, she believed he would still claim her. That was how the world worked. She had been property once, and she would remain property forever. Tears burned in her eyes, but she did not cry. She had no strength left to fight. The human raised his voice again, louder this time, so none could miss his words. "I do not claim her as property." The crowd fell silent instantly, every head turning in shock. No one had expected such a statement. The master's face twisted in disbelief. The human's next words struck the crowd like a hammer. "She belongs to no one. She walks free." A stunned silence spread across the marketplace. It was as if time had stopped. The alien girl froze, her breath caught in her throat. She lifted her head slowly, her wide eyes searching his face, waiting for some cruel twist, some hidden demand. But his expression was calm, unwavering, filled with a strength she could not understand. He was not mocking her, not playing some trick. He truly meant it. "She is not a slave," he continued firmly. "She will never crawl in the dirt again." The alien girl's lips parted, but no words came. Her whole life had been chains, first of wealth, then of punishment, then of humiliation. She had never imagined freedom. She had never even dreamed it was possible. And now, a human, a stranger, had given it to her, as if it was the simplest truth in the world. The master roared in fury, his voice trembling with rage. "You cannot do this. She is mine." He tried to rise, but his body failed him. His legs shook, his hands slipped on the blood-soaked ground, and the people only watched. The fear that had once bound them to him was gone. His voice no longer carried the weight of power. Some of the onlookers even began to cheer. A few clapped their hands, while others whispered to each other with awe. The story of what they had seen would spread beyond the market, beyond the city. A human had defeated their master and then done the unthinkable. He had freed a slave. The alien girl could no longer hold back the tears. They rolled down her cheeks, hot and uncontrollable. She fell to her knees, but not from shame, not from defeat. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Why? Why would you give this to me? You don't even know me." The human looked down at her, his face softening. His answer was simple, but each word carried weight. Because no one deserves chains. Because freedom is worth more than law. Because you deserve to stand. Her chest broke open with emotion, her hands trembling as she covered her face. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the years of being treated as less than nothing poured out in tears she had held back for too long. She had been told she was worthless. She had been forced to eat from the ground. And now, in front of the entire market, she was free. The crowd's noise grew louder, but she no longer heard them. She only saw the human standing over her, his figure strong, his presence unshakable. He had no reason to fight for her. Yet he had risked everything, bled in the dust, and broken the power of her master. Slowly, she rose to her feet. Her legs shook, but she stood tall, lifting her head for the first time in what felt like years. She looked at him, her voice trembling, but filled with sincerity. "I owe you my life. I owe you more than that. Tell me what I must do, and I will follow." The human shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Live your life. That will be enough." Her heart twisted. She could not understand him. No one in her world gave without taking. No one offered freedom without a price. Yet he had. It was something only a human would do, something that defied the rules of her people. The master lay broken in the dirt, his face twisted with shame, while she, once his slave, stood taller than she ever had. The human turned to walk away, and without thinking, her feet moved to follow. Not because she was commanded, not because she was owned, but because for the first time she wanted to. Her life had been changed forever, not by power, not by law, but by one simple act of humanity. The marketplace was still buzzing with voices after the duel, but the human did not pay attention to the crowd. His body ached, blood dripped from his wounds, and every breath hurt, yet his eyes were calm. He had done what he came to do. He had fought for the girl's dignity, and he had freed her. That was enough for him. The alien girl stood beside him, her heart pounding with emotions she could not name. She had been expecting chains, expecting to belong to him now as she had belonged to her master before. That was how it always worked. Slaves passed from one hand to another, but he had broken that rule. He had told her she was free. Free. The word echoed in her mind like a strange melody she had never heard before. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply followed him as he walked away from the circle. Not because he commanded her, not because she was bound, but because she wanted to. Her feet moved on their own, as if they knew she no longer belonged to the dirt, but to something greater. Hope. The master lay behind them, broken and humiliated. Some of the crowd still whispered about revenge. Others spoke in awe, saying they had never seen anyone challenge the law and live. But the human ignored it all. He kept walking, his steps steady despite the pain in his side. The girl stayed close, afraid that if she let him out of her sight, the cruel world would take her again. When they reached the edge of the marketplace, the human finally stopped. He turned to her, his expression serious. "You are free now," he said. "You don't need to follow me. You can go wherever you choose." Her chest tightened. The thought of being alone again filled her with fear. Freedom sounded beautiful, but it also felt terrifying. Where would she go? She had no family, no home, no place in this world. For so long, her life had been defined by chains and shame. Now, without them, she felt lost. She lowered her eyes and whispered, "I don't know how to be free." The human studied her for a long moment. His eyes softened, and he shook his head. "Then walk with me until you learn." His voice was calm, simple, but to her, it was like a door opening. She felt her knees weaken as relief washed over her. He was not pushing her away. He was giving her time. For the first time, she smiled. A small, broken smile, but real. "Thank you," she whispered. They walked together down the dusty path away from the market. She kept glancing at him, her eyes full of questions she could not yet ask. His wounds looked painful, and every step made him wince, but he never complained. Finally, she gathered the courage to speak. "Why did you fight for me? You could have walked away. No one would have blamed you." The human glanced at her, his jaw tightening. "Because no one should be treated like dirt. Because I saw someone crawling on the ground who should have been standing tall. I couldn't turn my back on that." His words struck her deeply. All her life, people had told her she was worthless. Her master had punished her for refusing him, her people had mocked her, and strangers had laughed at her misery. But this man, who knew nothing of her, saw her differently. He saw worth where others saw nothing. It made her chest ache, but this time, the ache was not from shame, it was from hope. As they walked farther, the weight of what had happened began to sink in. The duel had not just been a fight, it had been a symbol. The human had challenged a law older than memory and won. The people who watched would not forget. The girl realized that her story had changed forever. She was no longer just the rejected slave. She was the one who had been freed by a human's courage. She touched her hands to her face, wiping the last traces of tears. "You don't understand what you've done," she said softly. "In my people's eyes, slaves do not become free. We are reminders of punishment, nothing more. By freeing me, you have broken something far greater than chains." The human nodded. "Good. Then maybe it needed to be broken." Her throat tightened again. No one had ever spoken with such simple defiance. No one had dared to treat her as anything but an example of failure. And here he was, bleeding, tired, but speaking as if it was the easiest truth in the universe, that she deserved freedom. They reached a small stream at the edge of the village. The human sat down heavily, dipping his hands into the cool water to wash his wounds. She hurried beside him, her heart twisting at the sight of blood on his skin. "You're hurt," she whispered. "You need help." He shrugged, though his face tightened in pain. "I've been hurt before. I'll heal." But she could not look away from the cuts and bruises. For her sake, he had bled. For her sake, he had risked everything. She tore part of her worn cloak and pressed it gently against the wound on his side. "Then let me help you heal," she said firmly, her hands trembling but determined. The human looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he gave a small nod. "All right." As she pressed the cloth to his wounds, her heart filled with a strange warmth. She had thought freedom would feel empty, like being cast into the cold with nothing. But sitting here beside him, helping him, she realized freedom could also mean choice, and she was choosing to stay. Her hands were unsteady, her life still broken, but she knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer alone. A human had stood for her when no one else would. He had given her dignity when she had lost all of it. And though he said she owed him nothing, in her heart she knew her future would forever be tied to his. For the first time in years, she dared to imagine tomorrow. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors of fire and gold. The human and the alien girl sat by the stream, the sound of water flowing gently beside them. He was tired, his wounds aching, but his eyes remained calm. She stayed close, pressing the cloth against his side, her face full of worry. For the first time in years, she felt safe, even though danger still lingered in the distance. Behind them, in the city, the master lay broken and humiliated. His defeat was not just a wound to his body, it was a wound to his pride and power. Those who once feared him had seen him kneel in the dust. Some whispered that his reign was over, while others feared his revenge. But the girl did not think of him now. Her eyes were only on the man who had changed everything. The human leaned back, letting out a long breath. "You should rest," he told her softly. "You've been through enough." She shook her head quickly. "No, I cannot rest. If I close my eyes, I see the dirt, the shame, the faces laughing at me. But now, when I look at you, it feels different. I don't want to lose that." Her voice broke, and she lowered her eyes, ashamed of her own trembling. But he reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You won't lose it," he said. "Not while I'm here." The words filled her chest with warmth, but they also scared her. She had lived too long in a world where promises were broken, where kindness was a mask for cruelty. Yet his voice carried no lies, no hidden weight. He spoke as if his promise was unshakable, as natural as breathing. Night began to fall. The crowd in the marketplace had gone, but the story was already spreading. In every corner of the city, people spoke of the human who had beaten the master and freed a slave. Some laughed at the madness of it. Others felt a strange stirring in their hearts. If one slave could walk free, perhaps others could too. A seed of change had been planted, though no one could yet see how far it would grow. The girl sat quietly, her fingers brushing the edge of her torn cloak. She still could not believe it. Her whole life, she had been treated as nothing. Yet, here she was, sitting beside a man who saw her as something more. She turned her face toward him, studying his profile in the fading light. He was not like her people. His features were strange, his eyes sharp, his movements steady. But there was something in him, something strong and unbreakable, that made her heart ache with respect. Finally, she spoke. "When you looked at me, back in the dirt, what did you see? Why did you stop for me?" The human turned his head slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I saw someone who refused to bow, even when the world tried to break her. I saw fire in your eyes, even when you were crawling. And I thought, if she can hold on through all of this, then she deserves someone to stand beside her." Her breath caught. She wanted to answer, but her throat was too tight. No one had ever said such words to her. No one had ever looked past the chains, past the shame, to see her strength. She felt tears in her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of hope. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You gave me freedom, but I don't know how to live it." The human gave a faint smile. "Then we'll learn together." The night grew colder. She shivered, hugging her arms around herself. Without a word, he shifted closer, draping part of his cloak around her shoulders. She froze at first, then slowly leaned into the warmth. For so long, she had lived in coldness. Cold streets, cold stairs, cold silence. Now, she felt warmth not just from his cloak, but from his presence. In the distance, the master's broken voice echoed in her memory. "She belongs to me." But she shook her head. No longer. She belonged to no one, And yet, in her heart, she wanted to stay beside the man who had given her freedom. Not as property, not as a slave, but as someone who chose to walk beside him. The human's eyes stayed sharp, scanning the shadows. He knew the master would not accept defeat easily. There would be revenge, there would be danger. But his jaw tightened with resolve. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. He had said she would never eat from the dirt again, and he meant it with his life. The girl whispered softly, almost to herself, "For the first time, I feel alive." He looked at her, his voice steady. "That's because you are, and no one can take that away now." The stars began to shine above them, tiny lights against the dark sky. She tilted her head back, staring at them, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She thought of the other slaves still trapped, still crawling, still mocked. She thought of how they might feel when they heard what had happened. Maybe they too would find hope. Maybe they too would rise. She turned back to the human, her voice soft but full of determination. "I will not waste what you gave me. I will walk beside you. I will learn, and one day I will help others stand too." He gave her a small nod, his eyes approving. Good, that's the true meaning of freedom, not just to stand alone, but to help others rise. Her chest filled with pride at his words. She had been nothing more than a slave in the dirt, and now she felt like she was standing at the beginning of something greater. The night was quiet, but in her heart there was a storm of emotions: fear, hope, gratitude, and something else she could not name. Perhaps it was the beginning of trust. Perhaps it was the start of a bond deeper than chains, deeper than law. As she closed her eyes for the first time in peace, she thought of the promise he had made: she will never crawl again. And she believed it. Because she was not saved by mercy. She was not saved by pity. She was saved by humanity.